Hi, I'm William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and tonight I'd like to talk about a topic that came up while I was in a phone conversation with a prospective parent looking into enrolling some children in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. The topic that was raised has to do with textbooks and the actual study materials that students work with in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. This is an issue that I really believe that Christian people are getting wrong. I think that Christians are largely missing the opportunity that's in front of us. I think it's an opportunity that is especially beneficial to Catholic students. And I think that a sort of shallow-minded nostalgia and a fake love of literature leads people to have a desire to collect printed physical books as some kind of home furnishings. And I understand that because, I love the nostalgia of old books. I volunteered in an old bookstore back when I was in college that was actually housed within a Revolutionary War era house that was conserved and paid for by a volunteer community that ran a bookstore, a used bookstore. I love the old book culture myself. But when it's time to study, when it's time to do real study, that cultural enjoyment of the printed books and the culture of printed books from the past has to be set aside. It's a great hobby. It's a great culture, collecting books, looking for valuable used books and even building a library. But we have to understand that that's just, we're talking about hobbies. That's not how real studies gets done. And this desire to collect books, I really don't understand it, because a collection of books that someone has, there's a number of limitations on books. First of all, many of the best books, many of the most important books aren't in print because they're simply not popular enough to justify a company publishing them and keeping them in stock. Not enough people read the books, not enough people would buy the books, and therefore they simply can't be kept in print. So you're not going to have the best library if you collect books anyway. Secondly, the number of books that people collect, they certainly aren't able to read. And like I said, it's more of a home furnishing, more of a background image than any real supply for study materials. If you come into the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, you'll notice that there's really no talk about printed books, and there's a reason for that. Well, there's a number of reasons for that. The main reason for that is that in 2022, we enjoy a unique opportunity to study using digital texts that are free. If you think about it, any book that has been published more than 50 years ago is freely accessible to us from a number of online sources, Google Books, archive.org, and there are others. But we have free access to the content of much of the world's greatest literature, greatest publishing. It's free, and it's available digitally for those who would study it. And so the question comes down to, what are you really interested in? Are you really interested in studying these texts and learning the content of these books? Or are you interested in collecting books to put on a shelf and display? I've been working in classical and ancient studies for over 25 years now. And even when I was in college back in the 1990s, early 1990s, even back in the 1990s, we were already using digital texts. I can remember back in college, there was an online archive that was called Early English Books Online, and a lot of the original material that I started with in my research into classical Catholic education, or just classical Christian education at that time, came from these old digital archives of books that had been scanned, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century books that were scanned into this archive called Early English Books Online. And so my entire academic career, from my undergraduate studies into graduate studies and then into my professional academic studies, I've been making use of digital texts the entire time. I've never used books, and I may own 24 books, and the only reason I own them is because I was traveling or going to the beach or something like that, and I wanted to bring a book along, so I bought a book, and that's it. I mean, that's the extent of my use of physical printed books. Maybe a prayer book, maybe a Bible, a Loeb classic. I might have picked one up going on vacation to read, but none of my academic work, none of my serious studies have ever been done using printed books. And I think that if I even consider the effect that trying to do the work that I do with printed books would have, it would be so counterproductive. And I think because I am immersed in this academic work around the clock, year by year, I can't imagine trying to do the work that I do with printed books. It would just be impossible. And not only that, but the fact that I have access to these texts at no cost is such an immeasurable benefit and privilege that I enjoy and am thankful for, because it allows so much work and study to be done that I wouldn't be able to do. Sure, I might be able to find copies of many of the old books that I make use of in a university library or something like that, but it would be so inconvenient compared to what's available. And even those libraries, they're promoting the use of digital copies of their books. And so one thing that I really think that Catholics should embrace is, as far as formal academic studies, professional academic studies, I really think that students have to learn how to use digital texts. And that primarily means PDF texts for their studies. The idea that you're going to buy books for your classical Catholic education is just not realistic. Again, for a number of reasons. Number one, it's incredibly expensive. Number two, you can't even do it because the books aren't in print. Third, if the books were put in print, they'd be very expensive because there wouldn't be many buyers for those books. And fourth, if you're going to actually be using the learning that you're doing, if you're actually going to be writing and doing things academically with your studies, you're going to want to use texts that you can copy and paste when you're quoting and things like that. You're going to want to be able to share a link to a document, to a specific page, and so on. It's the whole purpose of the internet. It's what the internet was originally created for. If you go back to the early days of Google and how the search engine developed and what the search engine was for and what the internet was intended originally, and most primitively to be used for. It was for academic research and collaboration. And hyperlinks and things like that were intended to be used in place of confusing references to text that then had to go be looked up in card catalogs and things like that. Whereas you could just put a link to the document itself, and that would just make research and study so much more convenient. That was the original vision for the internet. It was a scholarly network of articles and resources that would promote study and research in all fields of learning. The problem with the use of the internet and the problem with the Christian use of technology is that we often use the technology to simply do old things. You know, we send emails like we're writing letters. We do old activities with the computer instead of thinking of how we can do things in more efficient ways using this technology creatively. And this concern about printed study materials, I think, is an obstacle. And this is my opinion. I think it's an obstacle that Christians have to get over and enable our children to be able to access all of this content and learn how to study in this digital environment, because it's so much more convenient, it's so much more affordable, it's so much more productive and useful. I just really hate the thought of Christian kids being raised with some sort of nostalgic idea that writing with a pen in cursive on paper or using printed books as if there's some intrinsic merit or value in physical printed things. I'd be happy to compare results with studies using digital materials over the course of an academic career and trying to do similar things with physically, printed on paper resources. So parents often contact me because they come from Mother of Divine Grace or Seton or some other homeschool program, where these other homeschool programs, they're really bookstores that use a curriculum to sell books. It's how book clubs work. You have access to all of these books to sell, and you have to think about some creative programs by which you can get people to buy books. Well, the perfect book selling program is a homeschool program. You put together a list of books and you promote your book lists for your bookstore among homeschool families, and they buy up boxes and boxes of books. It's a great marketing plan for book publishers or for book retailers. But it's not an intelligent educational plan. It's not good strategy for education. Those curriculum programs, those homeschool curriculums, first of all, they're limited by what's in print. And if you look through the catalogs, you can get a homeschool catalog from 10 different sources, Catholic or non-Catholic, and you're going to see the same titles again and again and again across all the programs, because those books just happen to be in print and they can be resold for profit. They're not necessarily choosing the best books. The best books, I know for certain, are not in print. And so our kids are being made to study inferior quality materials because they happen to be in print and booksellers are willing to sell them, whereas the best resources are available for free. If you just think of what it means for a text to be in the public domain, it means that the content of that book, after, let's just say, a century, is freely available to the public. It's in the public domain. So after 100 years of being published, the text of a book belongs to the public. It's free. If we think of classical Catholic studies, everything is free. Everything in the classical Catholic curriculum is in the public domain. It's the property of the people. It's public property. And to think of publishers trying to make money off of books by limiting what books they use based on what they can resell or what they would like to reprint, we're really ripping off our kids because so much more is available to them, and we're limiting their studies to what is profitable for the resellers or for the book publishers. I think Christians are really missing this opportunity. In the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, I've spent 25 years researching through all of the available texts, all of the available editions of texts, to find the best sources, and to organize them into the best overall Catholic study program. And I don't think there's any comparison to what has been arranged in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and the content is free. It's all in the public domain. And to think that we're going to, whine about the fact that, well, I don't like studying digital texts, or when I study on the computer, my eyes get tired, and, we're going to pout and whine about the inconvenience of studying an ocean of free texts that are available to us. I think we're just wimping out. I think we're just being lazy and wimpy. But I also think we're being dishonest, because I think the kids will make the same complaints about printed books. I mean, if you're going to read Aristotle in a digital text or in print, you're going to get tired either way. Don't blame it on the digital file. It's hard reading. It's mentally exhausting. That's not the digital file's fault. The same thing's going to happen if you try to study it in print. And I think it's just excuse making. I think we're just being lazy. We're making excuses for why we're studying a lot of dumb materials instead of better content that's available. We're trying to justify why we're not studying public domain materials that are better, as if there's some intrinsic value in studying a book. I mean, I hear people say things like, I just like to hold the book in my hand. I just like to... I mean, what are we talking about? Like, this is so soft and just, I don't know, I feel like it's childish. I'm going to choose the book that I study. I'm going to choose the content and the source of my study materials because I just like the way it feels. I don't know about you, but I don't make decisions like that. I run 6 miles a day, and I don't start running and say, like, I just like the way this running feels. I like the, I do what I think is good for me, and that often requires that I put myself through discomforts, and I have to learn to do things in new ways. I have to overcome difficulties and weaknesses and obstacles. And if an obstacle is getting used to studying from a digital text, I think I have to say, I think Christians need to toughen up and overcome this obstacle, because it opens up so much content to us for study and takes away financial obstacles, takes away obstacles of time and space. It doesn't matter whether a book is available in India or Indiana. I mean, I have access to it for free from my desk in my office. There's just no comparison to the benefits that are available through the study of digital texts. And I can often feel the aversion of parents to this idea of studying digital texts, and I have to say, I disagree. I think Catholics are making bad decisions on this one. I think that not helping our children to get used to studying digital texts, not learning ourselves to study digital texts, I think it's being irresponsible and sort of just ignoring the state of affairs in our generation and how studies are going to be done. And as always, when Christians play this nostalgia game, it just allows other groups to take the lead because they take hold of these opportunities, they seize these opportunities, and that's how Catholic culture gets undone. That's how, when we look around and we see unbelievers dominating every field and every industry and every different academic discipline, and we wonder, how did this happen? How did the dominant Catholic universities and monasteries of the Middle Ages lose to all of these inferior, modern, non-Catholic or even anti-Catholic movements and institutions? And the answer a lot of times is that Catholics choose to be lazy and nostalgic and just putz around collecting old artifacts while society moves forward, and instead of taking leadership, being innovative and creative, thinking about how to maximize Catholic influence, Catholics are just, coasting on the work that was done by their predecessors, and they lose control and influence in their own generation. And I think Catholics are doing that by this nostalgic book collecting rather than getting on board and making use of the resources that are available. So I really disagree with parents who are trying to limit their kids' studies to physical books. There are all kinds of obstacles and challenges with using technology, but if anyone can deal with these difficulties and overcome them, it should be Catholic people. It should be us. We should be the ones who have self-control. We should be the ones who have discipline. We should be the ones who are governing ourselves and using things with integrity. We should be the ones who can do that. I don't know why we're throwing the white flag at this challenge. I also mentioned, as the discussion with this parent went on, I was asked, well, what sort of devices would you recommend? And everyone thinks that if you're going to study digital materials, you need some kind of tablet or an Amazon Kindle or some kind of, e-book reader. And, I don't agree with that at all. I'm sitting here at my desk in front of a desktop computer. This is where I study my digital texts. I have 2 monitors here. I'll always have my reference sources and reference materials on one monitor while I actively work on the other screen. I have a tablet. Right here I have a Samsung tablet. I also have an Amazon Kindle that I may use just for easy access to a book I'm reading or something like that. But my real academic work, again, I'm talking about real academic work and study, is done on a desktop computer where I'm working with a keyboard and monitors and using these digital texts and all of the tools that are available to study these digital texts. But I'm also using that study and to actually produce and write and teach and evangelize. And when you consider the active use of these studies, digital materials there's no competition. They're so much more efficient and useful. If I find a good book or a good text or even an interesting chapter, I can give somebody a link and share that with 1,000 people in 10 seconds. The other day I sent my wife a letter from St. Jerome that I found that he wrote about how to raise girls. That kind of convenience, there's just no comparison to how this works in an active Catholic life. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe we're not thinking enough about how we're going to use this learning and contribute actively to the evangelization and sanctification of our culture. But I strongly recommend the use of digital study materials. As for devices, I don't recommend things like the Amazon Kindle or even tablets, because there's active work to do. The kids need to read, but they also need to type and write and submit assignments and take quizzes and things like that. And the best device that's available today is the Chromebook. It's the best. You can get a Chromebook for a Catholic student to study with. They're less than $200, and they have Wi-Fi access, they have a webcam, they have a keyboard, microphone built in. They're just great tools to use for study, and if you get the right ones, they're pretty durable. They actually can take a licking. They're pretty tough devices, and so I think the Chromebook is just an invaluable tool. Like I said, you can get one on Amazon for under $200, and you get a Chromebook, open it up, sign on to the internet, and you have access to thousands of years of study materials for no additional cost. I mean, the benefits are just immeasurable, and I just think Catholics are really whiffing on this one. Internet access and a Chromebook gives a child access to sacred scripture, the church fathers, the writing of all the saints, the writings of all the ancient philosophers, original language materials in Latin and Greek and Hebrew, foreign languages. I mean, the benefits are just so innumerable, so innumerable. And when we talk about the dangers of using the internet and computers, and there's one issue that is this giant elephant in the room that parents don't want to talk about, and it's supervision. It's supervision. If the parents are not going to supervise their kids, the kids are going to be curious and get into trouble. Don't blame the kids. Don't blame the internet. The tools are amazing and awesome. The opportunities are awesome. The resources are awesome. The kids' nature is what it is. That's why they have parents. That's why they have parents. I mean, the same thing is true of food. If I left my kids to themselves, they would live on cinnamon rolls and, sweet tea. I don't call food evil because my kids would like to eat unhealthy food. I provide my kids with healthy food, and I supervise their eating and make sure they eat healthy food. If my kids were free to do whatever they want, they might sit and play video games for 20 hours a day. That doesn't mean that video games are bad. It's very pleasurable, and it has to be enjoyed with moderation within the balance of a responsible life. And that's the responsibility of parents of children, is to make sure that they are living a balanced life. All these benefits available, when you take all of these resources that are available and you join them together with responsible parenting, the children have incredible opportunities. If you have a parent that doesn't want to be bothered with with supervision, and that parent then tries to, blame problems that develop on the internet or on computers or on the children or on technology or on Google, it's just irrational. That's not rational. The problem is the lack of supervision. The problem is the lack of responsibility of the parent to allow the child to enjoy all of these benefits that are available to them. I mean, immeasurable study benefits. And I'm saying that as a teacher. Immeasurable study opportunities are being squandered by Catholics because parents are annoyed by the need to supervise their children's use of the internet and computers. A lot of the negative things that are said about the internet aren't even true. For example, like like your children are going to stumble into scandalous material while they innocently, browse. That's not true. That's not true. If you look, Google and these search engines, they do an amazing job. They really do all that they can do to prevent children from seeing bad stuff. You have to explicitly search for bad things or dig into a third or fourth page of results to even see immoral results through an internet search. There are safe search settings. I mean, the technology providers, they do everything that they can, but there's no way that they can guard against a kid unsupervised who is explicitly searching for bad stuff. That's not Google's fault. That's not the computer's fault. That's not the internet's fault. That's a lack of supervision. Any kid, not any kid, but most kids will do that sort of thing just out of curiosity. If I leave my kids alone on the computer for a long time, they're going to find some goofy games on the internet, or they're going to be on Google looking for pictures of deep sea creatures and all kinds of goofy, curious stuff. And occasionally they would look for some bad stuff. And that's why we have to supervise it. We have to supervise it. But I'm not going to, spite myself as a parent and as a teacher and say, well, because there's bad stuff on the internet, I'm not going to let my kids use it. Spite them. That's just spiting myself as a father and a teacher. That's not a reasonable response to the actual problem. So again, this is my opinion. I think that the resources are incredibly valuable. I think that the online sources are much more innocent and praiseworthy than they're spoken of by Christian people. I think parents are neglecting the work of supervision, which this really depends on. And I think if that's something that parents can learn to overcome, that they can learn to really supervise the children's use of these tools and resources, there's just so much available. And I really hope that Catholic kids get a chance to learn about it, to see what's there, and also to learn how to use it by experience through the years as they work through their formal studies. So in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we're going to make an effort to make printed copies of things available, but it's never going to be a priority for us because it's just not sustainable, and it's going to become increasingly less sustainable over time. I provide students with access to PDF documents for study because they're flexible and useful. They can download the PDF documents. They can read them on their computer. They can download it onto a USB. They can download it onto a tablet. They're very useful documents. They can open, multiple windows on their computer and have the document in one window and their word processor in the other. They can take notes on there's so many ways to use these documents, and it takes some time. It takes some time to learn how to use them, and to try to use it the first time and just fuss about it that's just childish. If parents need help learning how to use these materials, I wish that you would just ask for some practical advice and tips. Hey, Mr. Michael, how do you use a PDF file for your studies? Where do you keep them? How do you organize them? How do you study them? And so on. I'd be happy to share practical details and things like that. But like I said, I study them right on my desktop computer. In fact, I keep a pretty good collection of them that you're free to use. If you go to classicalliberalarts.com/resources, classicalliberalarts.com/resources, you'll find a pretty lengthy collection of PDF files that really is my main storage place for most of the texts that I work with day by day, and you're free to use them. They're all public domain, or at least most of them are public domain documents that you're free to download and use as you please. But that's how I study, and I really recommend if the work that I do impresses you, you see the research that I've done, you see the publishing and online work that I've done, the articles, and how I incorporate all these studies into these articles. You see the book that I put together, Understanding Classical Catholic Education, and how all of these sources are woven together in these works and articles. This is how I do it. This is the method, and if you enjoy those things, if you find them useful, I encourage you to trust me on this one and learn to make use of these digital documents, because they're invaluable. And if we'll just get used to doing something that we're not familiar with, instead of whining about it and fussing, I think we'll open up some great opportunities for our kids. So I just wanted to expand on that a little. I talked a little about that with a parent today, and I assume that anytime I receive a question from a parent, I assume that there's 50 other parents thinking the same thing or asking the same question, and I like to try to answer these individual questions publicly to try and help parents who, for whatever reason, haven't asked. So that's why I make use of digital documents in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. It's why we're going to continue. I think it's going to be more and more useful as time goes on. I think print books are going to become less and less sustainable. And we work to take these PDFs and convert them into fresh new digital documents that are even more useful than the originals. And that, I think, is a work worth investing in. The production of clean, new, freshly edited, formatted digital copies of these old books. So that's an explanation of why we do what we do in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. If you have objections to what I've said, I would really like to hear them. I'd like to hear some good objections to the ideas that I've shared. If you think I'm wrong about something, if you think I'm missing something, if there's something that you think I'm not seeing based maybe on your experience with them or something like that, let me know, because I want to know these things. I'm always thinking about how we can improve things and make studies more efficient and more affordable for Catholic families. So if you think I'm wrong, or you'd just like to raise an objection just to see what I say or what I think about it, please do so. You can write to me at mail@classicalliberalarts.com, and I'll give it a thought. I'll give it a thought and get back to you and let you know what I think. So I'd appreciate that feedback. I'd also appreciate it if you've had good experiences with them. I'd like to hear that. I'd like to hear how you see your kids using digital documents, or how you've used digital documents, and why you might agree with me if you do, from your perspective, because your experience with them is probably quite different from mine. So I hope that's helpful. That's an explanation of why we use digital documents in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. God bless.